2022 is shaping up to be a crazy market, like maybe even more so than 2021. And 2021 was just off the rails. I haven't seen this in my 13 years in this industry, and it is just, the demand so far has been through the roof. It's not a matter of if, it's about every property that you make an offer on is going to have another offer. There are so many bidding wars. I just had a colleague that had a property that went live on Friday, and by Sunday she had 54 showings, 9 offers. I mean, that's insane. So let's talk about some tips to make your offer the most competitive offer it can. And here's my top 5. And if you follow these, I think you have a very, very good chance of winning. Okay, before we dive in, make sure that if you like this video, make sure to subscribe right below. Also, if you're looking to buy or sell in the area, you want some of these expertise, or if I can help you in any way, give me a call. I'd love to help you in your home search or your home sale. Okay, let's dive into it. So we're gonna start in the top 5. Before we get into this, the thing to understand here is we got a pendulum, and you got to decide where you are going to land on your risk assessment, because you can either be super risky or less risky. And the more risk adverse you are, the less competitive you are. But the more risk you're willing to take, the better your offer is going to be. And so we need to always gauge and consider that when we're thinking about these 5 steps, because there's a different level of tolerance that everyone's willing to do. That said, I had a client last month that said, "Hey, Adam, I need some advice." We were in a competing offer situation, and she said, "Tell me how you would write this offer if it was for your family or best friend." I said, "Okay." So I said, "We're going to do this, 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 and that." It's all the 5 steps I'm about to tell you, and guess what? She won the offer. So if you follow these tips, if you're willing to take on some risk, if you trust your realtor, you could have the winning recipe. All right, the 5th item we're going to start with: don't nibble. Don't nibble. And what I mean by nibble is don't add extra contingencies. Don't add extra items. If the seller says they want to keep this light, they want to keep this mirror, if they have something reserved, let them have it. If you're going to nibble on it, you're going to lose, because it automatically, compared to another offer, makes you so less competitive. That also includes on things like asking for closing costs. You're not going to do it. Don't ask for it. Don't do any of the extra contingencies. Contingencies on reviewing the neighbor's yard or the lot next door, or whatever it is that you want to add extra contingencies. Do not add extra contingencies. Do not nibble. Ignore closing costs right now, and respect some of the requests the seller has, whether those are reserved items or what have you. If you do those, that'll automatically be the first step to not being discarded completely. Okay, the 4th item we're going to look at today is inspections. Now, inspections are a big one. I do not advise that you do not do an inspection. I think everyone should do an inspection on a property. I know there's a lot of discussion out there whether in a competitive market you should just always be making as-is offers, and you can. If you're a builder or a contractor or someone with expertise that knows enough about the property that you feel that you're comfortable with the purchase. But otherwise, you really should know more about the house and what you're purchasing, and making as-is offers is just so risky. So how do you do that and still stay competitive against, offer buyer 1, 2, and 3? Well, here's some tips. First of all, on one end of the pendulum, you have just a regular inspections where you can ask for anything to be negotiated. Okay, that's the less risky end. Okay, and then on the other end, you have the as-is. So we want to find what's that in-between area. So you could have something that just says, doing inspections for informational purposes only, but reserves the right to declare the offer null and void if I find anything major. Okay, so that's not quite an as-is, but it gives you the right to at least review and approve the property before you 100% commit. Okay, the next step might be something like putting a cap. Like, I agree to look at the property, but if there's inspections that exceed $5,000 in total remedies, then offer may be declared null and void. That says that I'm not going to nitpick on the small items, that I'm only going to focus on the major items. And as long as the house is in good condition, we're good to go. If you kind of figure out where you want to land in there, that's kind of a good step. I like to do the informational purposes only. That says, look, unless there's something super, super major, I'm not going to sit here and go after you on it and nibble at you. That's probably my preferred method. But where your risk tolerance is will depend on how you want to do it. Also on inspections, keep in mind you have a home inspection, a radon inspection, and a wood destroying insect inspection. Do you need all three? In a normal market, I would say yes, but maybe you decide that you're willing to take on the risk. For example, if you do have radon, you can mitigate for radon. You could test for that afterwards and mitigate it on your own. You're looking at maybe up to $2,000 in mitigation risk. But if you take that risk on and that chance and then you test later and just do it yourself, that's something you could do. Wood destroying insect, I mean, your agent should be able to give you some advice there, depending on the age of the home, the neighborhood, all of those sort of factors. I mean, it might be a low risk. So maybe that's one that you could skip. So you can maybe skip those two and then just do the home inspection. You have 3 inspections. How you want to set them up is up to you, but less is more here. So if you have less inspections, it could look much more competitive. Let's go into the third tip. All right, financing. Financing is a big one. How do you compete with a cash offer? Well, that's tough, but it's not impossible. In fact, I've had many offers in the last year that have won against a cash offer. They just had to structure it different. So to a seller at closing, they're not getting a suitcase of cash. They're getting a check. Whether the bank writes the check or the buyer writes the check, they're getting a check. So it's the same thing. Really, cash benefits the buyer the most because the buyer then has less steps, can close faster, and has some savings of their own. We won't get into that because that's a whole video in itself. But from a seller's perspective, cash or conventional really are the same except for one big thing. You got underwriting and appraisals. You have to have that with the conventional mortgage. So how do you make that the best you possibly can? Well, the appraisal is hard to control because you can't control what an appraisal value is going to come. The bank just through a lottery system chooses who the appraiser is going to be for the day, and we have to just kind of go with the seat of the pants and see how it's going to land. Now, that said, your agent should be able to give you some good insight into, is the home priced well? What's their expectation? So we have a good idea of whether that appraisal is going to come in at the home's value. But even if the property doesn't appraise, which you should prepare yourself for, do you have the ability to fill in that gap? And if you do, then this is a way to really make your offer competitive and close to the same as cash. Because a cash buyer could also write in an appraisal contingency, though often they don't, but they could. And if they do, then they're really not that much better than a conventional mortgage, although they don't have to do underwriting. But they probably won't. And even if they did, we know they have cash, so they have the ability to perform the difference. So perhaps you have enough down payment that you don't need the full appraisal to purchase the house. So for example, let's say the house is $400,000. You make an offer for $410,000, okay? So you could write, I just needed to appraise for $390,000 or $400,000. And then the difference, you just have to come up with the difference as the buyer. You just need an appraisal to that amount, to whatever set amount that you want to offer. So if you write that in the offer, that could make you a competitive offer against somebody that say needed to appraise at the full $410,000 as an equal apples to apples offer. So make sure that you talk to your agent about financing terms and what's the appraisal amount that you need? What other sort of options do you have that could also make your offer competitive? Here's another one. What financial institution are you working with? Out-of-town lenders aren't as good as local lenders. And the reason is because the local lenders are so busy doing all the local loans that they have most of the A-rated appraisers. They have the best appraisers working for them. So I know from a risk assessment, if I'm on the seller's end, that bank is going to get it done because they have some of the best team working for them. Versus if you get a bank that's from out of town or out of state, they're having to hire an appraiser of whoever's available. And that could be an appraiser in a different county, in a different city. And that appraiser is driving here and they just don't know this market. So from a risk assessment standpoint, that appraiser is less likely to not have issues. They probably won't ask the questions and they won't know the market as well as the local banks and the local appraisers do. So a local financial institution in a competitive market is so important. And I get it. Maybe you're coming here from, 2 hours away and you got, your best friends at a bank over there. That's fine, but then consider that appraisal contingency because that's going to be a huge issue if I was on the seller's end and reviewing those offers. And a lot of sellers just want to reduce their own risk. So consider the appraisal. Do you need it to appraise for the full amount or not? Consider using a local financial institution if you're using a bank. And if you use some of these recipes for your own success, you could be just as competitive against a cash offer as well. All right. Let's talk about the second step, which is possession, closing costs. A lot of people forget this. They ask the simple question of, what is your seller's preferred possession. Maybe the seller doesn't really know. They don't know yet. Maybe they're buying another house. They're not quite sure. Consider writing a flexible possession. So let's just say buyer writes an offer that says possession will be between March 4th and June 4th. Seller and buyer to mutually agree on the date in between those times. That sets a parameter, but doesn't guarantee. It gives like a 3-month difference to when that could occur. That gives that seller a lot of flexibility. That's a huge benefit to some sellers who aren't sure on their next step yet. That has been a huge, huge misstep to agents I've seen when I'm on the seller's end that bring me competing offers. Those agents overlook that because they get focused so much on price, which we're getting to next, that they forget about possession is really important element to a seller and the stress that they have with a big move as well. So if you have flexibility on possession, that is great, and that is something to discuss. Okay, let's get into the big one. The number one, price. We always get fixated on price, and price is a big thing. Don't forget those other 4 items, because those other 4 items are very, very important, and they can also be the difference between the price of one offer and another, and that you don't even have to be the highest price to win. If you have those other 4 items, you might be a winner, but price is still a big item. Oh, where do we start? Price. Escalation clauses. We have to talk about them. They're big, they're happening. They've been around for years, but they've become the most popular thing to use now. Agents love to hate them, but love to win. And the agents that don't use them, more often than not, don't win. So using an escalation clause is important, and you should consider talking to your agent about using one, even if your agent doesn't recommend using one. We have to let all egos aside. I hate escalation clauses as well, but if you don't consider them, or at least talk about it, some of the benefits, then you might be the difference of losing out on that particular property. So I know what you're asking is, what is an escalation clause? Well, the easiest way to think about it is eBay, right? So if you go on an eBay and you make a bid and it's at $100, you put a starting bid of $100, it has an escalation factor of say $5, and then you put in your cap bid. Let's say it's $130. So every time someone bids in between, it goes to that bid plus the escalation factor. That's what an escalation clause is. So let's go back to an example. A $400,000 house. Maybe you make an opening bid of $400,000, then you put in your escalation factor, let's say it's $1,000, and then you say it goes up to $410. So that means if an offer came in at $403, you would get bumped from 4 to 403, match it with 1,000 more, you'd be at 404. Okay, sounds simple, but it's not simple. It's very complicated. And one thing that your agent should also be doing is they should be using a separate addendum created by an attorney that has all the different options you have in an escalation clause. Because a lot of times, if an agent just sloppily writes in one sentence there, it isn't going over all the options or scenarios of what could happen. Because consider this. What if offer 1 had an escalation clause, but so did option 2, and so did offer 3? That's hard to figure out which is the better offer. That's why you need that addendum to spell out the different terms, because real estate agents do not have the license to practice law. And it's arguable of whether writing escalation clauses, because they're so complex and competitive and hard to understand, are practicing law. So make sure they're using an addendum so you go through all the different options. And those options include, okay, on that 400 example, if it goes up to 404, does it need appraised for 400 or 404? Make sure you're writing that in there. What happens in a multiple escalation offer? How does that sorted? How is that handled? You need to talk about that with your agent. And when you look at that form, it'll go through all those options and you just check the checkbox which one you want. All right, some tips on an escalation clause. First of all, you probably should start at the asking price. That I recommend. If not, start a little higher. I mean, if you have that $400,000 property and buyer 1 writes a pretty similar offer, starts at 400, but buyer 2 starts at 405, boy, just starting at the 405, they sure look a lot more attractive, like they want it a lot more than buyer 1, right? So consider maybe starting a little higher on your starting bid. Of course, the ceiling is where everyone focuses, like how much risk are you willing to take on? What's the top? So you can think about that and come up with that. But I would consider from a starting tip, just start a little higher than the asking price. But the next tip is the biggest missed tip by most buyers and their agents in a competitive offer situation. What is that escalation factor going to look like? Is it going to be $500? Is it going to be $1,000? And what is that going to look like for a seller? So let's talk about that. I see so many agents in the last couple of years that have been doing like $500 or $1,000 escalation factor. $500 and $1,000 is a lot of money, but not in real estate. In real estate, it's like a cup of coffee. $1,000 isn't really the make or break deal if I'm looking at buyer 1 and 2 and it's $1,000 difference. I have so many of those other terms that we just discussed that I don't care if I'm getting another $1,000 here. If those other terms and considerations are in there, I'm going to go with this guy. So $1,000 really is not enough. And just forget $500. It's not even considerable. 1,000 isn't enough. Go to 2, go to 3. Consider a higher escalation factor. More importantly, don't use round numbers because that's what another agent's going to do. So to go to 2,000 might be good, but what about 2,500? That offset of just a little bit could be the difference in you being the higher offer in a competitive bidding situation. What's a disadvantage of an escalation clause? Well, you're kind of showing your hand. Hey, I'm only making an offer of 400, but I'm willing to go up to 430. Well, why didn't you start higher? That can be a lot of the critics' argument of why not to use an escalation clause. I completely disagree though, because what I see more often than not is when you have multiple offers, the seller's not going to sit here and play with one and counter back and forth. They're just going to find one of them, choose that one, focus on that one, and work with that one person. So they're not looking to do multiple back and forth on negotiation. They just want to consider which one had the best offer and go with it. So I like escalation clauses for that. I found that sellers and clients tend to like just the ability to make a decision once, not have to counter back and forth 5 or 10 times. So figuring out how to structure your escalation clause in your offer is really important to making sure that you have the most competitive edge you can. So let's go through these again. Number 1, don't nimble. Any extra contingencies, extra requests, or not respecting whatever the seller asked to stay reserved is just going to cost you the offer. And forget closing cost. Number 2, inspections. I don't recommend foregoing inspections, but consider doing inspections for informational purpose only, or up to X dollars, or only looking for major items. Financing. Consider your appraisal. What amount do you need it to appraise for? And then you fill in the gap on anything excess of that. There's still a risk, but consider that. Also, consider a local financial institution. That one is huge. Number 2 is, the 4th item, is closing and possession date. If you have flexibility, offer flexibility. And the last one is the price, everyone's favorite. Rather than just give your best price, consider an escalation clause, consider the escalation factor, considering starting slightly above the listing price, and those can be all winning recipes. Okay, other tips. Use a realtor. Realtors have the most number of experience. I had 62 transactions last year. That's 62 transactions of experience in just 12 months that I was able to see what works, what doesn't. That's what helps makes this video. And every scenario is different. Each offer will have a unique set of attributes that you will do some of these and not all of these, or you might just do something totally different. So an agent will have the experience that you need to have the better recipe for success. Other tips, do not write cover letters. Cover letters are getting a lot of flack, particularly because they don't really fall under fair housing for a number of reasons. We won't go into that, but cover letters really aren't going to be that important to winning the house. Another big tip, don't forget your earnest payment. Now, earnest payment is your good faith deposit that you give when you present the offer. That's the consideration with the offer that you present. The national rule is 1%. So if you have a $400,000 house, you could do your $4,000. But if you put $10,000, that looks better. Consider doing a higher earnest payment as well, and that could be a big difference. Some real estate agents really want to see that, and those brokerages really want to see that, and that could be a big difference. So if you're already going to put 20% down, then changing from 4 to 10,000 in this example isn't going to make that big of a difference, but it makes your offer look better. It's a small thing that you can do that could be the difference in winning you the offer. I hope you enjoyed these tips. I had a lot of fun this last year. It was very stressful for a lot of clients. It's going to be stressful again this year, but there is an opportunity for you to succeed. And if you follow some of these steps and you consider some of your risk assessments, it could really help you win your next dream home. Appreciate you watching. Look for my video next week. Thanks.